Well, there was this single mom I met whose 40-year-old son with schizophrenia had been in and out of the hospital dozens of times. He was out of control again, acting violently. This mom was at wit's end and decided to change the locks in her house, knowing her son was doomed to end up on the streets or in jail. What a horrible decision to be forced to make, to put your own sick child out on the street or to become unglued yourself. Another woman I know, a grandmother, is married to a guy with bipolar disorder and explosive personality disorder, which I guess is exactly what it sounds like. More than once, I've heard this woman say, "I hate it when people say to me, 'You're such a good person for staying married to him.' First of all, it makes me feel crazy or stupid for staying with him. Second of all, some days I just hate him." One statistic you'll hear is that 90% of marriages in which one partner has bipolar disorder ends in divorce. Now, actually, that's from a 2003 Psychology Today article with no scientific evidence. No one really knows. So how do you know when you've reached your limit? Is it when your loved one no longer complies with meds and therapy? When there's physical, emotional, or sexual abuse? When there's sexual neglect? When only death do us part? Or is it when the months or years of hopelessness, despair, grief, and loss finally outweigh that moral voice in our heads that tells us you can't give up on someone whose sickness is causing them to act that way? At some point, good husbands and good wives and good siblings and even good parents call it quits. Those who stay and those who leave are neither villains nor saints. I don't judge. I've been there. I don't judge. Instead, I dwell on this last question. How do we find hope and meaning in a loved one's suffering? You know, every so often, but particularly on holidays, I would wonder, what happened to my wife? Will I ever get back the Leah I knew? And so sadly, Leah too wondered if she would ever get back the Leah she knew. How could we remain hopeful? The truth is, I was grieving. Leah was alive, but the life we'd planned together seemed lost. Well, a friend suggested I read Pauline Boss's book about ambiguous loss. Dr. Boss wrote that the turmoil family members of those with a chronic illness go through is the result of ambiguous loss, which occurs when someone is, quote, physically present but psychologically absent. Ambiguous loss is a roller coaster ride, Dr. Boss writes, during which family members alternate between hope and hopelessness. How could we remain hopeful? At several points in my life, I've returned to psychiatrist Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. The book is in part a memoir about the author's time in a concentration camp during World War II. Recalling prisoners who found no hope or meaning in their lives, Dr. Frankl wrote, quote, "The prisoner who had lost faith in the future, his future was doomed. Usually it began with the prisoner refusing one morning to get dressed and wash or to go out on the parade grounds. He just lay there, hardly moving. He simply gave up. In the darkest moment of her depression, Leah lay there, hardly moving. I can never speak for Leah or anyone with a serious mental illness and how they find hope and meaning in their despair. But for me, I took heart in what Frankl wrote about changing our attitude toward life. Quote, "We had to learn ourselves, and furthermore, we had to teach the despairing men that it did not matter really what we expected from life, but rather what life expected from us," unquote. In my 60s, I've unexpectedly learned what life expected from me. I think it starts with people like us talking honestly about our struggles and advocating for those in need so that those who won't or can't or are too traumatized to talk about their hardship may be more willing to do so in the future. I have the duty to remain hopeful for Leah's sake, our children and grandchildren's sake, for the sake of all of you attending this conference. Most importantly, I have learned that for my own well-being, I have to remain hopeful of a better future for me. My friend Chris was going on to me about how courageous I am. I said, "Stop right there. Leah is the most courageous person I know. She's had the courage to continue on through her sickness, to keep taking her meds, to keep taking care of her own health. Heck, the courage to live with me for nearly 40 years. And Leah had the courage to support my publishing a memoir about what it's like to love someone with a mental illness. She never doubted my intentions. Most importantly, Leah thinks that my book, Unglued, lives up to its subtitle, A Bipolar Love Story." And speaking of love, the final thing I found so striking about Viktor Frankl's book appears early on page 37. Now, remember, he's writing about life and death in the concentration camp. Here, he's recalling what he describes as the pink light of a Bavarian morning beginning to spread behind a dark bank of clouds. Just then, he pictures his wife's image. Real or not, Frankl writes, her look was then more luminous than the sun, which was beginning to rise. A thought transfixed me. For the first time in my life, I saw the truth as it is set into song by so many poets. The truth that love is the ultimate and highest goal. The salvation of humanity is through love and in love. Leah and I have come a long way since lighting the Hanukkah candles. I said to my wife before I left, I said, "I'm over it. I'm not going to cry at all while I'm reading this." I forgot what a long way we've come. Leah and I have come a long way since lighting the Hanukkah candles in 2014. From behind the darkest bank of clouds, she and I have learned to live with her mental illness. Last month, we drove together out west and among dear friends, together watched a luminous sunset at an outdoor wedding in the Colorado mountains. Leah, who is a humanist, credits good meds. I call it a miracle. I hope that whether you are a mental health professional, a caregiver, or a person with a mental illness, you, like me, are lucky enough to find the light of your own well-being through love and in love. Thanks again to JFCS for inviting me to speak, and I look forward to continuing this discussion.